Thank you, Laura. Hi. Thanks for hanging around till the afternoon. Day 3. Thank you. The goal here today is going to wrap up the 3 days of discussions that we've had. My name is Huynh. I'm Director of Regulatory Science at Critical Path Institute. And part of that involves an educational component. And I'm also leading the collaboration with the University of Arizona that also has a graduate program in regulatory science. So go Reg Sci. We're not going to go in too much detail in terms of introductions because you have their bios attached to the program. But what I would like to do is start with David Strauss. Dr. Strauss, as acting chief scientist now, and your many roles within the leadership of the FDA, could you share some information in terms of what your team has been exposed to in terms of the methodologies that are required for regulatory science and how the innovation can move forward in regulatory science?
Right. Well, thank you for the invitation to be here, and it is a pleasure to join another Critical Path Institute conference. I have focused in my time at FDA, which has been 14 years on the device side and the drug side, and now in the Office of the Chief Scientist on trying to move new science into the FDA review process. And that's how I like to think about regulatory science. And I think that one of the most challenging, or the most challenging part is not the science, but it's the people. And yeah, not that people are bad, but you got to get people together. So I'm a big supporter of public-private partnerships like Critical Path Institute. I've worked with a number of public-private partnerships during my time at FDA. I've had very positive experiences. I alluded to it briefly earlier today, 2 panels ago. I had the opportunity to work on a cardiac safety initiative for multiple years where we were working to use in vitro and computational modeling methods to replace a clinical study in looking at drug-induced abnormal heart rhythm, proarrhythmic risk. And I was amazed by how much this initiative, there it was HESI and the Cardiac Safety Research Consortium that were the primary public-private partnerships engaged, and with sort of FDA engaging, and we provided this a minimal amount of funding, then we were able to get so many groups from pharmaceutical companies, from the technology developers, from academics to come together and contribute to this broader effort, and people donating their time and their expertise. And we were able to go through that process. And then I had the experience of then transitioning as we moved into updating the ICH guidelines, the International Council for Harmonization guidelines. And that is, and I had the opportunity to serve as the rapporteur of that ICH group as we went through and updated the cardiac safety guidelines. And once again, it's very much the people getting everybody to agree and work together, and getting people in the same room is what's critical to move things. And I think we're able to move things forward from lunch discussions, not the regular conference calls or roundtables. So yeah, I really encourage everyone from different backgrounds, from regulators to regulated industry to the drug development tool industry and academics to come and work together. We can't advance things ourselves at FDA. We need the whole group to come together, and I think Critical Path Institute really plays a unique role there in being able to do that.
Thank you, thank you. And also a follow-up. Since the beginning of this year, FDA has introduced a number of hub-type centers, one of which is the Rare Disease Innovation Hub. How do all these centers, in particular the Rare Disease Innovation Hub, play, overlap, coordinate with your office?
So yeah, I mean, specifically this Rare Disease Innovation Hub is primarily a CDER, Center for Drugs, and CBER, Center for Biologics, coordinated effort. There are, in the Office of the Commissioner, when this reorganization goes through, there'll be created an Office of the Chief Medical Officer, and some of the clinical, right now it's called the Office of Clinical Policy and Programs. There's some functions there that will fall under the Office of the Chief Medical Officer, which is Hillary Marston at FDA. That there's some of the pediatric and Office of Orphan Drug Products are there, and they're engaged. So the Office of the Chief Scientist is involved in cross-cutting scientific working groups and policy. That very specific effort is primarily being driven by, I think, the Center for Drugs and Center for Biologics, but it's an example of an area where, yeah, we need innovative approaches because it's very difficult to develop drugs for rare diseases.
Yeah, nice. Like to move over to our second FDA guest, Meghana. On day one, we heard from Dr. Cavazzoni, who mentioned a number of new initiatives and programs, one of which is the CDER Center for Clinical Innovation Trials, C3TI. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, its missions, its goals, and how that center is working together to, again, harness the collaboration with public-private partnerships?
Sure, sure. So CDER Center for Clinical Trial Innovation, C3TI, is an effort that we launched in April of this year, but of course it took us a couple of years to get it up and running. And so it's a central hub that's really designed to support the innovative approaches that are going to drive efficiency in drug development. So I'll underscore that idea around efficiency specifically. And so that's going to entail promoting some of our existing CDER innovation programs, such as complex innovative trial designs or model-informed drug development, as well as spurring future clinical trial innovation efforts as well, really through communication and then collaboration, which is really, I think, at the end of the day, in the spirit of what we're trying to do, working collaboratively, both internally and externally. And so as a central hub, C3TI is looking to share lessons learned. We've heard throughout the panels the importance of doing that, both the successes as well as perhaps efforts that didn't work out so well, but that complete story, right, around our experiences related to clinical trial innovation. C3TI is really dedicated to communicating and collaborating with external researchers and drug developers, and even expanding opportunities for drug developers to interact with our CDER experts internally. And we have 4 main key activities to kind of help drive those objectives. And the first is the C3TI demonstration program. And so I'm really excited about this effort. And so it's an opportunity to really test, scale, and kind of integrate select innovative approaches in clinical trials by increasing our engagement, our interaction, both internally with our review staff, with our policymakers, right, folks working on perhaps our guidance documents, things of that nature, and with drug developers. So kind of a really concerted effort to really think through that bridging from perhaps pilot projects, pilot programs to more broad scale adoption. And so this is a great way both for FDA staff as well as external parties to share case examples, have those lessons learned, and gain more experience in these areas. And I will put a plug in that we are accepting proposals right now for the C3TI demonstration program. And so to learn more about that, it's visiting fda.gov/C3TI. We got a nice friendly URL for it, actually. We have 3 specific areas under the demonstration program that we're accepting applications for. The first is the Bayesian supplementary analysis project. And so this is really thinking about broadening our experience with using the statistical approach without really impacting the review, right? Because we're looking at using Bayes for the supplementary analysis. The other area is selective safety data collection. So those who are familiar with ICH E19, this is kind of an effort tied to that. So really focusing on that streamlined data collection in areas where we have, for products that we have a very well-characterized safety profile, let's reduce some of that unnecessary data collection, that burden, and be really thoughtful and strategic with what we're collecting. And then the third is what we've coined the streamlined trials embedded in clinical practice. New center, we had to come up with at least one new acronym, right? We are FDA after all. So this is STEP. And so this is really thinking about integrating trials into routine clinical practice. So there's a lot baked in this one, right? It could be decentralized trials, digital health technology, real world data, thinking about other innovations to really kind of take research to that community level. So really excited about that one. So that demonstration program is one of the key activities of C3TI. Another one is, it's really important to have knowledge sharing as a key point when you're thinking of fostering innovation, right? And so we have a curated central knowledge repository that we've coined C3TI Compass. And this is a streamlined, searchable resource that allows users on our public webpage to quickly find information on the range of activities related to clinical trial innovation that CDER has done, as well as ongoing projects and resources. You'll see a lot of familiar efforts from CPATH and some of those consortia, for example, in our C3TI Compass, right? And it's really the idea of allowing folks to quickly access relevant information, see what's already been done, what's happening now, where there are potentially gaps, and really kind of quickly access that information. We're also, to kind of bring all of this together, C3TI really has robust internal and external communication and engagement. That's a critical factor here. And then we're also serving as kind of a single point of contact in CDER for innovation related inquiries. That's both, once again, for internal folks as well as for external folks. And I think you had a slight kind of second question baked in there, so I'll touch on that briefly as well, which is kind of thinking about collaboration, right, and the role of public-private partnerships as far as kind of where that plays a role in what C3TI is looking to do. Going back, as I mentioned, C3TI is really focused on driving that efficiency in drug development. And to do that, we want to foster a clinical research ecosystem, right? Ecosystem-wide culture that really embraces the clinical trial approaches. And so for that, we need to, engage and hear from different types of experts, developers, regulators, but also, healthcare providers, and CROs, and just so much more than perhaps what some of our more standard typical engagements might entail. And that's really an area where I think working with or through public-private partnerships or other collaborative efforts, it's really important for us. And then just underscoring that when you're looking to transition from pilot programs to broader adoption, we need those lessons learned, the examples, the trainings, and that's another area where we have to do that collaboratively, right? FDA cannot do that alone, but we are certainly happy to be at the table for that. And then at the end of the day, to drive the innovation, we have to address systemic trial execution issues, right? We're talking about operational pressures faced by CROs and trial sites, integrating data sources seamlessly while maintaining that trial efficiency, or integrating trials into healthcare systems, all topics that have come up in the last 3 days, right? And so to address this, we need that multi-stakeholder, multifaceted approach. And we need to reach the folks who may not be as routinely involved or familiar with clinical research. And so there's really, I think, a need for that pre-competitive neutral space that public-private partnerships can provide. And so, as I said, C3TI was really designed and launched in the spirit of collaboration. And so moving forward collaboratively is really the only way that we can meet C3TI's priorities.
Fantastic. I think that adds a lot more clarity to many of us around here. So thank you. I'm going to hand it over now to my co-moderator, Cécile.
Thank you. Yes, thank you everyone for being here. And first of all, I really would like to thank Ralf Herold, who is online. It's 10 p.m. for him. So thank you so much, Ralf, for being here. And also maybe one of the points that you could address also is the new methodology working party at EMA, which might have some aspect related to the free CTI center at FDA, where clearly the EMA was also aiming at having a multidisciplinary approach, which clearly is needed in order to advance innovation in some areas and if you can. Currently, Ralf, you are also head of the Workstream Regulatory Science and Academia at EMA. And we would love to hear from you the EMA perspective on regulatory strategies and where global regulatory science is heading now that we have the office in Europe and building on the experience of CPAS in the last 20 years. I think that offers big potential for facilitating global collaboration and developing tools that are of use in different regions. Thank you.
Well, that's a very, very nice question, Cécile, and colleagues all. Good afternoon from Amsterdam. And let me start with the last element. Where is global regulatory science heading? And these are all just personal comments, but I think regulatory science should be heading where we together want it to go, where we all interested to advance public health would see it's needed. And this sounds trivial, but I think this meeting, this Global Impact Workshop has shown that these discussions are necessary to identify these areas and to discuss both the advances that were made, but also what more needs to be done. From a regulator perspective, and again, some personal reflections, where global regulatory science is going is to pursue the idea of convergence also for regulatory science research. We think we regulators can intensify our work amongst regulators on this topic, and this is what we're pursuing, and this meeting stimulates, I think, me further to find ways to work together across the globe. Not just the major regions, but really thinking of what it means to advance regulatory science really in the many legislations and with many regulators who are, for example, in ICMRA. But before going the methodology working party, can I just say something that the research and collaboration in regulatory science is needed because we have many horizontal questions with medicinal products, and regulatory science allows us to advance this horizontal question, which in turn allow us to enable new type and classes of medicinal products. And I really look at the topic of regulatory science and research as an opportunity for change, and as public-private partnerships, in my view, are agents of change and are part of a continual change, really. So that is one way to look at it, but I would like to expand and say that beyond the public-private partnerships, we need to create a virtuous circle of learning on regulatory science. We need to be better at identifying issues, working together to dispatch high-quality research, but then also fostering the uptake and in particular learning from application of new drug development tools. And I think we have some elements, but it's not yet a circle that is self-reinforcing and also bringing change more effortlessly. So on the point of identification, let me just say that we will soon publish our research needs in a new version, and we hope that CPATH and stakeholders of CPATH will engage on it and will give us their priorities and insights on what are these new topics that would benefit from large-scale projects that then can bring new solutions. And we think that public-private partnerships are really valuable to deliver these new solutions. They are versatile. They can address a range of research gaps. And I try to be very systematic always because the research gaps are very different. Some topics present us with knowledge gaps. Some have theory gaps, concept gaps, or empirical gaps, or perhaps just certain populations haven't been included. And the more we define the type of gap and research challenge, I think the more efficient we can deliver. Because on our own, we as the EMA could not at all address the research needs. So we rely on the PPPs also because they provide a very high quality framework for delivering such solutions. The PPPs, the public-private partnerships, such as PPA, bring in relevant stakeholders, have relevant methods for managing engagement, etc. So there's a host of experience of how to do the research and to deliver it that is really very valuable from our perspective. So the methodology working party at the EMA also introduces new elements. There are specialized communities that will engage with academic researchers and open new opportunities for discussion of solutions, of needs, etc. And perhaps it's that element in particular that we can come back to later when it's being further developed, that allows to have broader conversations on regulatory science, so on the issues, on the potential pathways for solution. But more broadly, what I see in the future is a growing role and place of organizations, not for profits mostly, composed of people rooted in academia, sometimes a successor to a consortium. And these organizations now provide regulatory science support. And that's a very interesting new stakeholder in the field, so that developers are not directly coming to regulators, but already engaged with these structures, again, that come out of public-private partnerships, but are sustained. And they are front-loading addressing issues with regulators, and so could help us to accelerate and make increase the efficiency of the whole research and development enterprise. So, and that's the picture, Cécile, on your mission for global regulatory science that we see, and where I think we can work further together with CPATH to work on these points. Back to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ralf, for this very clear information about where EMA is on regulatory science and where to go. And I think that you have highlighted an important point also, because I mean, in some discussion, there are a lot of expectation from the regulators, and then others on the developers or on academia. I think what I see at CPAS or in public-private partnership is that it's down to everybody to take responsibility to get things moving, and not necessarily to wait for yet another guideline. Maybe there are things that can be done already in view to prepare for a guideline. You mentioned this morning, Ralf, the neonate guideline that is being reviewed. A lot of work goes into preparing new guideline, new framework, and that's where the PPP can help to inform these discussions that will result in further guidance or identifying what are the needs, whatever a DDT, a qualification opinion, is the right answer to the questions, or is it rather a public only research questions because it's too early and require further public funding, or is it public-private funding? So thank you very much, Ralf. And for you, Ralf, thank you for being here. You had a long trip yesterday, and for joining all the discussion on neonates and all the work. And as you mentioned, you are the head of pediatrics, but also a neonatologist. And could you share with us where do you see the advantage of public-private partnership in advancing neonatology issues that are being faced for many years?
Yes, thanks a lot, Cécile, also for enabling me to be here again. So I had the privilege of working together with INC since it started and had its first initial big workshop still in London. Yes, we have to be humble with respect to neonatal therapies, and I have to also manage my own expectations. But just to perhaps be a little bit more specific, I'm, for example, very happy that we haven't given up on BPD, and that CPAS is setting up version 2.0, so to say, and will kick off a very important meeting for this tomorrow. As you all know, BPD is not the only neonatal condition where we need therapies. And in this respect, I see also the new cell and gene therapy working group as a form of extended neonatology. I know in a strict sense, neonatologists might make differences and beg to differ between neonatology and pediatrics. However, it is marvelous to see for once that neonatology actually is driving something. I mean, pediatrics has been driving us, and I really always like to remind colleagues of this, has been driving initiatives, and Cécile, you have been very instrumental in this area, for example, in the area of extrapolation, and giving us also the opportunity to learn about uncertainties, as I mentioned today. It's an important tool. It has been driven by pediatrics, and now the neonatal space is also giving back something to other spaces. However, we obviously need these therapies for neonates. We have heard a lot about tools. We are regularly as a standard using modeling and simulation for our PIPs and also in neonatology, even if it is also in this area quite a bit of a challenge. Hearing about NAMs, I just thought perhaps that could also be integrated, for example, to think about models in the area of neonatology where we do not have sufficient animal models, for example, HIE, but also BPD and these discussions around the threshold or between maternal data and neonatal data is a really exciting approach, and I'm looking forward to advancements. Please excuse if I also see a legislation as a tool. It might be more boring, it might be not so innovative. However, for example, the pediatric legislation in the new pharma legislation proposal is here to stay and is also further developing. So it's a little bit a ping pong of legislative measures where EMA is collaborating extensively with FDA, taking some measures forward. For example, PIPs based on mechanism of action, which shows flexibility. Also in measures we provide, stepwise PIP, it sounds very, as I said, boring, but it also underlines our obligation we have to push for this. And this stepwise PIP, for example, gives much more room for development and gives more space. So up to now, as you all know, developers had to give their program in one go, including long-term follow-up on everything, even if we didn't have sufficient evidence to support this at the time. So it's in a way also accompanying what we're seeing in all our scientific discussions. What should I call for action? So much is being done here. I'm really happy, but I would take this call for action home to Europe and tell colleagues, just look over here, what is happening. We really need to step up. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ralf.
This time I'd like to bring our industry representatives into the conversation, Dr. Vaidya and Dr. Van Goor. Kristin, you have a unique perspective, I think, that your experience from Takeda is with established consortium as well as experience with a nascent program. Can you speak a little bit to the value of coming on board and supporting something nascent that's still questionable? How has that experience been? And what are some of the challenges within the company that you needed to go overcome to get their buy-in?
Yeah, I can certainly speak to that. So I've been involved in the early days of CPA1 going back to when I was at Vertex prior to coming to Takeda. So I had the fortune, the insight to see it from two different company lenses, which has been really interesting. I think, you know, one of the biggest, well, the first question that we look at when we look at a new consortia is who's at the table. And when you see FDA there, you see them engaged, you see them showing up and being vocal. That's a really big deal. That's a really big deal. And then the next thing we look at is what we can contribute. What can we offer in terms of expertise, in terms of time and energy, and then also in terms of data. So depending on your company culture, that can become the sticking point. Some companies have very rigid philosophies around sharing data, if that ever happens, when it happens, how it happens. And other companies view it very differently. So that dialogue, and CPATH has gotten very, very good at navigating those conversations with companies and making it as easy as possible. But, you know, that is one of the things that, one of the barriers that you encounter early on. But, you know, what I would say too is just being able to make the value proposition. There's a lot going on within companies. There's a lot of reprioritization. There's a lot of assets coming in and out. And so being able to identify near-term practical wins as well as meaningful long-term goals is really critical. So I think we heard a lot over the 3 days about, starting with Peter Stein on day one, starting with really having clear objectives and not overlooking those important interim steps that will get you somewhere bigger and more impactful in the future. And so I think we've all gotten better about not always going for qualification of an efficacy biomarker, right? Like it just won't happen. It just won't happen. And it doesn't need to happen. And so we've all gotten better about kind of scaling back to what actually makes a difference. Now we say fit for purpose. Now we talk about doing things in the context of an IND. Now we talk about prognostic biomarker being a reasonable first step to getting confidence that it can be used in other situations. So I think we're all getting better at articulating the value proposition within our companies, but it does take a champion. It does take someone who will continue to drive it day after day, will find the right stakeholders within the companies, have the conversation, make the case. But there's so much value. There's so much value even in the early days. I mean, CPA1, we still don't have the data in-house. That's the active point of focus right now, is getting the data in. And we've been meeting for almost a year in closed sessions. And that itself, those monthly calls by Zoom, provide tremendous value. Because one of the things that we're always doing within a company is we have our asset, we look at the various regulatory risks. What is the primary endpoint environment? What is the clinical trial enrollment environment? And we score them. What's the probability of that risk manifesting, high, medium, low? And what will be the impact to the program if it happens, high, medium, or low? And so what's my job? My job is to look at all the things that are high, high, and figure out a way to make them not high, high. And I can say, because of the work that we've done with CPATH, I have had the most important line item on a drug development program in that risk register go from high to low because of calls we've had with CPATH, because of things that the regulators have said during CPATH meetings. That is huge. I mean, that keeps an asset from getting cut. So that's just a bit of, I could go on all afternoon about the value of CPATH. I think anyone who knows me knows that I love CPATH and the work that's done here. So if anyone wants to talk more about it, find me.
No, I truly appreciate that. And I didn't even coach her on that either.
They don't pay me to
So
do that.
that was very heartwarming and honest. And I think it helps us help the smaller companies and the new groups that are new to CPATH have a better understanding of what sort of the expectations are when they're getting themselves into a consortium and the resources that they may need to provide as well, and the commitment at a certain point. Pujita, I'd like to pose a question to you in terms of the value to your company as well, in terms of, are there examples that you can offer in terms of adoption? What's the end outcome of a consortium work, and how can that help a company global endeavors like yours?
Well, thank you. Yes, definitely. So first of all, thank you so much for having me here to sort of wrap up this 3-day discussion, which has been great. I mean, overall, Sanofi is part of many CPATH consortia for many years now as well. And we really, truly see the value of bringing all the key stakeholders together as equal partners to the table to develop considerations documents, tools, resources, all of that to advance the science and drug development with a shared goal of addressing that unmet need, whether it's in a specific therapeutic area or more broadly in a disease agnostic space. So that's definitely important. And what that really means is when you bring all of the stakeholders together, is we get the opportunity here directly, engage directly, to Kristin's point and other points that others have made, with the regulators, like to understand what are their considerations, how are they thinking about a certain situation, what are their considerations, and then think about and then bring in the industry perspective, and here are the challenges that we're seeing, because sometimes the regulators actually don't know what the industry challenges are. So having that dialogue, and it's not just for regulators and industry, other key stakeholders, academia, and I want to hyper focus on the patient stakeholders who are part of this, because that's really important. And just to double click on that importance a little bit, is the patient voice is so critical in the work that we do, whether we're in industry, whether we're a regulator, academia, more broadly, because whether we're developing clinical access assessment, a digital health tool, or thinking about identifying endpoints, or thinking about the benefit risk assessment overall, we need to understand what is most important to the patients and what the patient perspective is. Are we measuring, what's most meaningful and what matters to them? Is it going to, is that going to be clinically meaningful? Are we addressing their most burdensome symptoms? And do we understand the impact that it has on their daily life? And how can we do better to develop the appropriate assessments to measure what actually is important? Because at the end of the day, the work that we're doing is to improve patient outcomes, and it's for the patients. So I just want to add a point about, the value that we see overall. And this is how I'll bring in some of our Sanofi examples, right? First of this is the opportunity for those early regulatory discussions, right? That's very critical. And I'll give the example of the multiple sclerosis consortia that we have, right? There are these challenges in having fatigue accepted in trials as a highly relevant endpoint, but the consortia has given us this opportunity for that early regulatory discussions and to talk about how can we get to a point where these relevant endpoints like fatigue are accepted in MS. So having those conversations early is very critical. And from Sanofi's side, on that where we're really trying to contribute there is also through the data sharing aspect, right? So what we've done is that we've published our own psychometric data from our MS trials to help contribute and to really advance that science and the regulatory science overall. Because at the end of the day, we know that developing drug development tools, it's not an easy task. It takes a lot of time, takes many years. So whatever we can do to collectively work together and make anything as broadly applicable in therapeutic areas is critical. Another point I want to make is about, how these forums consortia provides a disease agnostic forum for us to have discussions about not just focusing on the science, because I feel like a lot of times we focus so much on the science that that sometimes the operations gets lost. But the ECOA consortium, I'll give as an example, is where we have been able to bring the science and the operations discussions together, where it meets, where we can have those discussions where those two points meet, and we can then think about, so how can we create solutions that are feasible and that results in better measures that are more viable and having technology that serves science overall. And we take that back at Sanofi, and we're also then thinking about, well, how can we then internally bridge that gap so that the science meets the operations to make sure that the theories that we have of what is happening is actually happening in the field. And if it's not, what do we need to do? Do we need to go out and educate? How can we improve that so that we don't jeopardize our trials? And then the final example I want to give is around our efforts in the rare disease consortia. And one of the things that we've really found valuable is the pragmatic approach that has been taken in that, and the collaborative effort to take the best advantage of the tools and models that already exist. So it's not about reinventing the wheel, going out and trying to go and qualify a new tool every single time, but it's about looking at what's already out there and what are those improvements that need to be made, and having the conversations within the consortia to think about, well, what can we do to make this better? Because at the end of the day, we can't always create new tools for each and every rare disease that's out there, but we need to understand, what is the patient perspective and what is the most, the most meaningful aspects of health that we can measure. Let's say, for example, function specific measures, and that can be sensitive to change, but not disease specific. That way, once we understand that, that can be applied more broadly, and that can help, overall rare disease drug development, pretty much. So at the end of the day, overall, I mean, we see a lot of value in the work that we've been doing at CPATH. It helps helps us determine how we can collectively move forward, collaborate with global partners. And at the end of the day, it's all about all of us contributing to that whole and that end goal overall. And as industry, I mean, we're sharing knowledge, there's new resources and data so that we can overall help and accelerate that development of novel therapies and innovation. So.
Thank you. Again, I did not coach her on that. And I appreciate both Kristin and Pujita giving us a little bit of a lens into how industry is actually taking the learnings from the consortia back and into their regulatory strategy conversation back at the home base. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'd like to ask each of you now for this last part of the call for action. If you had a magic wand, and what do we need to make more success out of PPPs? I mean, for instance, I'm based in Europe. I'm living and breathing discussion around PPPs, what is needed, when do you need regulatory science, when do you need for the data collaboration? So from your different perspective, regionally, but also in terms of stakeholders, what would you like to see, or what do you think is missing? Who should it come from, for example, that could help advance the successes under the framework of PPP, sorry, I'm getting tired. PPPs, yes. Maybe Ralf, I think you are also in this boat in Europe, and you might have a view on that, and then we can move. Yeah, thank you.
A magic wand would be a good tool to wish for more magic wands, but for the first one, I think both more of the same, some more sustainability, transparency, to make this working model that colleagues have so eloquently explained from Takeda, from Sanofi, by David, and I think, and by Ralf, and I think this is known to us insiders, but I think it's still something that can benefit from more awareness and promotion. Certainly also on the side of the regulators. And if I had then my last part of the magic wand, I think I do understand from the input that I just heard the value of conversation and exchange and talking about issues and de-risking and so on. I find this very instructive and highly important. And perhaps that's an element we can better develop in European consortia. But I would also think that the wand would be particularly wanted for PPPs to enable going into development areas that are truly underdeveloped, where there is no progress because there are no endpoints, there is the patients are scattered, the interests are so conflicting that developers don't go there. And if PPPs can contribute to better connect the islands of development in the sea of diseases and so on, I think that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralf. And Ralf Bax, Dr. Bax.
If I am very concrete, I would hope that, and again, looking at the European space, that you just could raise your wand and have all these data, I'm again going back to neonates, sorted and collected and encouraging. I mean, I'm still meeting colleagues from academia who see a regulator or me just as a hurdle. And that even after, I don't know, so many years. And again, one has to ask oneself, perhaps I need a wand to improve our communication and to work. And here I see an opportunity that apparently we haven't reached. I mean, apparently we are speaking here to a choir, as Lynn has said, and we need to extend this choir in order, because there's a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, and if such a PPP can guide this a little bit into the right direction, I believe we could even manage more.
Yes, thank you. And I can only agree that there is the need for a shift of a mindset to have. There will always be challenges, as I said this morning, and try to understand, okay, for that challenge, what are my tools? And maybe they are in the regulatory toolbox, maybe they are somewhere in academia, maybe, and try to see the environment as a toolbox that we need to use in different ways for different situations and turn, as Klaus say, turn challenges in opportunities. Which is something I like very much. And so what about from your perspective, David?
Well, there's been a lot said and about public-private partnerships. I've expressed before, I am a big supporter of them. I've found a lot of value personally in getting out and talking to others, hearing different perspectives. I think too, another example wasn't a critical path meeting. It was a meeting run by the Reagan-Udall Foundation for the FDA, where they had brought patients, or it was focused on overdose and on individuals that were using opioids and had to use naloxone before, and it was very enlightening to have those individuals as part of the discussion and to understand different perspectives about benefit risk considerations. And so once again, I think, getting out from within FDA, or I think within a pharmaceutical company probably, or other regulatory agencies, you can get stuck just sort of in the same way of thinking. And so, being able to, you need to do that sometimes to get business done, but then to get out every now and then and talk to other people is good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What about you, Kristin?
Yeah, so I think when we think about the global environment and how to really move things forward, it comes down to, really having a forum where you can manage the complexity and people can come together, the diverse perspectives can come together. And those perspectives, you don't have a stakeholder group that's marginalized. And I think CPATH does a really, really good job of bringing all the voices to the table in an equal way. There are plenty of conferences where I walk in with my industry badge and I feel like I'm not an equal partner. I feel like people don't want to hear from us, or there's a view on what we, should or should not do. And Ralf feels like people think he's a barrier. These are real mindset challenges. And so I guess my call to action would be, as we go back to our separate corners and our separate sub-ecosystems, really squish that idea that we need to have our separate perspectives. And because there is a lot that we can achieve when we all come together. I'd say another thing that Ralf said that really resonated with me is there's so much power in getting together and sharing your research needs, your research questions. And CPATH and any successful PPP does a really good job of that. If you think back to how the patient-focused drug development initiative started at FDA, and Pujita can correct me if I characterize this incorrectly, but FDA sought public input, but what they also did is they went to the review divisions. They went to the reviewers and they said, what's on your desk that's really hard from a benefit risk perspective? And they generated this list of the initial 25 conditions. And I remember I was on the industry side back at pharma, and I won't say who it was because I know they believe differently now, but a head of regulatory at a large pharma company said, what is this list of diseases? No one's doing drug development in these spaces. I mean, they thought it was just ludicrous. And look at what has happened, though. We have drug approvals. We have drug approvals in gene therapy approvals in sickle cell disease. I remember that meeting. The sickle cell disease community said, we have told you our life story. What are you going to do next? And it took 10 years, and that's terribly unfortunate. That's too long. But just sharing those priorities, FDA reviewers putting it out on the table and saying, I don't know how to think about benefit risk when this IND turns into a marketing application. Industry and patient groups writing in and saying, we need endpoints here, we're not measuring the right things. And all of that comes together to a complete transformation of how we think about drug development. So that was maybe a tangent, but I think it's just really important to kind of remember the importance of being fully transparent about what your challenges are and say it very plainly and frankly to the other stakeholders.
Thank you. And Pujita?
Yeah. So just thinking about what, some of the key elements for global, sort of in the global context for public-private partnerships to be effective. I think one of the things is a clear purpose, right? Which CPATH has done a great job. It's something that we need to continue to do, whichever public-private partnership we're working on, is having that sort of clear stated goal that's measurable. That's always very, very critical. The other is the timeliness, I think, right? Being able to start early, start at the right time, understanding what the environment's like at the time, what are the challenges, what are the unmet needs. And I think the hardest thing that we face sometimes is, let's say we're thinking about COAs and whatnot, it takes so many years to develop tools, right? And then by the time we're at a certain point, for certain companies, it's probably like, oh yeah, that's too late. So how can we be more efficient there? I think that's another thing that we need to think about. something that you mentioned in your earlier plan, one of your panels, Cécile, is about that sustainable structure, right? I think that's really critical. And having that, I think Lynn had mentioned this earlier, about that trust model overall, right? With all of those pieces in place, I think whichever context you're working on, and especially in the global context, all of that can really come together and be successful.
Thank you. And Meghana, you have the last word.
That's really tough
That's
because
tough.
I know this is a question that folks have been opining on for over the past 3 days, in addition to on this panel. So I really don't know if I'm going to have anything new to add, but there are certainly certain points that resonated. So maybe I'll just kind of touch on those perhaps. I certainly think that multi-stakeholder engagement, that having that active involvement of a range of different stakeholders is really important. To just make sure that the different perspectives are captured, as folks have said, for those more comprehensive, well thought out solutions. During the panel today, we talked about the importance of FDA being at the table and other regulators, for industry to hear from them and vice versa. And of course, the importance of having individuals with a lived experience. I think it's also an important exchange across global regulators, right? Regulators to regulators. That's also another important dialogue that often happens at venues such as these, right? So I think that's an important component as well. I agree that we, over the last 3 days, we've heard a lot of progress that's been made, but how much more work that we have to do. And so that makes that resource allocation conversation, that decision-making, all the more critical, right? So really directing our efforts, resources, staff, regulatory staff, limited time, so much to do, right? Towards those most promising opportunities to advance the scientific knowledge. So really, where can we kind of get the most bang for our buck, right? Having the well-defined goals, as folks said, and really kind of managing expectations. So maybe it's not going all the way through qualification, but what are those milestones? How do we get there? What's that roadmap? What's that course correction plan? If we're not really hitting those, when do we kind of take stock and maybe take a step back, right? Just kind of being very thoughtful and intentional. And then of course, that knowledge sharing and communication, right? Really disseminating information, both, once again, what's working well, what's not working well. I think it's just so important because we just don't want to be duplicative. We don't want to be redundant, right? And we want to make sure that all parties externally are informed and aligned because there's just so much work to do. So that just gives us a better chance at kind of more efficient and really better outcomes for patients at the end of the day. So.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone, and thank you Ralf for joining. I'm sure what Meghana said resonates with some of your activities and focus also on your daily job. I don't know, I don't think we have much time for questions, but we can take one if anybody has the energy left to have one question.
Who dance? Let's go away.
Lynn, okay, great.
Really quick, Solange sort of whispered it to me and I thought, that's a good idea. But we talked about bringing together all these groups to talk, but then, Carla was over here and I had talked about, well, Epic needs to be involved. And she says, well, we had Epic come to one of our meetings. So what about PPPs collaborating with other PPPs?
Yes. No,
So
it's a very good thing because actually last week I was in Geneva at an NIH meeting organized by KIT, and the mission of this program is to put all the tuberculosis consortia in one room to have cross-consortia strategy in the area, and definitely in rare disease, that's something that is could be done in neonates, and there is a lot happening, and definitely, and to get, I mean, here it's my bias, but the data and the regulatory strategy right, because depending on the purpose of the PPP or the public academia consortia, there might be the need to level set, and that's an opportunity when you have that. Yes, definitely.
I have been, sorry. That's a good point, because I have been talking with Carla, because that's an idea too. It's just a matter of time to align on what projects would be most valuable, the low-hanging fruits for both organizations and others as well. So that's on my radar.
Yeah, and Solange mentioned IHI.
Yeah.
Well, they were at the NIH kit meeting. It was IHI, so yeah.
Yeah.
Good, so we have plenty of energy left.
Thank you so much, panelists.
Thank
Thank you, Ralph, for staying online with us.
Let's do it together in one go, because this was fantastic, by the way. And the whole meeting was fantastic. We connected a ton of dots, but what I took away were more dots that we need to connect together. And your last point was one of them that we identified for what's going to happen now. In order to do that, you're going to need to be involved, because that's what's going to help us continue to be the best partner we can be for our regulatory colleagues, for our people that are in need, for our existing pharma partners, but also for the new pharma partners that we hope are going to get involved after this. And as I continue to have all kinds of cool ideas, there's one person that I want to acknowledge, because it's the one person that gives me what I ask for the most: reality checks. Kristin, you are the best person that gives me reality checks all the time. Thank you. Without her reality checks, this wouldn't have happened. I don't know what we would be doing. Okay, so this is our mission, right? So this is not just a mission that we put on a slogan. This is something that we live by every day. And throughout 3 days, we don't only envision the future, but we're shaping it. And we're going to continue to shape it. And next year is going to be even better. And next year, it's going to be in September. That week of September 7th, more details are coming, but it's going to be tied to our 20th anniversary celebration as well. So, thank you, and let's all go have a drink.